When you think about power, what comes to mind? Probably governments, big corporations, maybe armies. But what if power isn't just out there? What if it's actually written on and through our very bodies? Today, we're diving into this idea of corporeal power, and not as some force that just acts on us, but as something that actively produces what our bodies even mean. All right, let's get into it. And this quote from Bibi Bukaria Yusuf, man, it just hits the nail on the head. It points out this huge gap in how we usually talk about the body in theory. It's a challenge, really. It asks us to look at the bodies that are marked by violence, by race, by class, that fleshy materiality that so often gets ignored. Okay, so this all boils down to one central question for this whole explainer. How does power really shape our bodies? Is it just about laws and being controlled? Or is there something way deeper going on? Something that actually defines who gets to be considered fully human, whose life is valued, and whose isn't? To even start answering that, we've got to look at what you might call the standard story of how power works on the body. It's a really influential theory, for sure, but as we're about to see, it's got a pretty massive blind spot. So, this whole idea really gets going with the philosopher Michel Foucault and his concept of biopolitics. What's so wild about this is the shift he spotted. Power wasn't just about a king having the right to kill you anymore. No, it became about managing life on a huge scale. We're talking about controlling birth rates, public health, population statistics, all to make the nation stronger and more productive. Then you've got Giorgio Agamben, who takes this a step further with this idea of bare life. Now, this is life that's been totally stripped of any political or legal protection. It's just biological existence. His go-to example is the concentration camp, what he calls a state of exception. It's a space where a person is placed so far outside the law that they can be killed without consequence. But here's the huge catch, the big but in this whole story. This standard theory, as compelling as it is, suffers from what our source material calls colonial amnesia. It's like it tells a story about power that just magically starts in 20th century Europe, almost completely forgetting about the centuries of colonialism, the slave trade, and empire that came before it. And this is where it all comes to a head. It's a fundamental disagreement. The standard view kind of treats racism like an unfortunate side effect of biopolitics, something that pops up when the state's management of life goes wrong. But the critique we're looking at says, no. No, you've got it completely backward. Racism isn't a consequence. It's the foundation. It's the blueprint. Biopolitics didn't invent racism. It was literally built on the racial hierarchies created by colonialism. Okay, so if the standard story has this massive blind spot, what's the alternative? Well, let's turn the page and dive into a decolonial framework that looks this history right in the eye. This new way of thinking is really built on the shoulders of three incredible thinkers. We've got Sylvia Wynter, who's going to make us question what human even means. Then Horton Spillers, who draws this absolutely crucial line between the body and the flesh. And finally, Françoise Vergès, who shows how our modern world runs on what she calls an economy of exhaustion. Let's break these down. So first up, Sylvia Wynter. Her big idea is that the very category of man, the default rational human being, wasn't just born, it was constructed. And it could only be constructed by inventing its opposite, the racialized other. Through a process she terms sociogeny, social categories were made to look like biological natural facts. So for one group to be seen as fully human, other groups had to be systematically dehumanized. And Hortense Spillers, wow, she takes this even further with this gut-wrenching distinction. A body, she says, is a person. It's someone recognized by society, with a family, with a name. But the sheer violence of the Atlantic slave trade created something else, the flesh. The flesh is not a person, it's a thing. It's raw material, a commodity that can be ungendered, bought, sold, and abused. It is, in her words, the 0 degree of social conceptualization. Okay, and then Françoise Vergès brings this right into our world today with her idea of the economy of exhaustion. Her argument is that our global system of racial capitalism literally depends on the wearing out, the using up, and the premature death of certain people. Think of the essential workers, the cleaners, the farm laborers. Their exhaustion and expendability are what makes a comfortable, clean life possible for a select few. Now, I know these ideas can feel a little bit academic, a little abstract. So what happens when we use them like a new pair of glasses to look at the world around us? Let's put this theory to the test. We're going to look at 3 case studies. All right, first up, the carceral state. We're talking prisons, migrant detention centers, so-called black sites, the whole system of incarceration. And wow, the difference in perspective here is just night and day. The standard view tends to see something like a concentration camp as an exception, a weird legal black hole. But the decolonial view, it sees a direct, unbroken historical line from the slave plantation to the modern prison. For this view, the prison isn't some exception to the rule. It's the logical continuation of a system that has always needed to cage and control certain racialized groups.
Okay, case study number 2. Let's talk about something called biocapital, the modern global market for biological things like organs, sperm, and eggs, and even surrogate pregnancies.
So, the usual take is that this is all super new, a product of our high-tech world, right? But the decolonial lens says, hold on a second. This practice of turning human life and reproductive capacity into a commodity to be bought and sold, that's not new at all. It has a direct ancestor in the system of slave breeding, where the wombs of black women were treated as capital to produce more property. That same logic is just showing up in a new, high-tech form. And for our last case study, this one's gonna feel familiar. We're talking about the COVID-19 pandemic. Remember all that talk about we're all in this together? Or the worries about a new age of government surveillance? Well, the decolonial framework helps explain why the pandemic's impact was so brutally unequal. The fact that racialized communities suffered and died at such higher rates wasn't some tragic accident. It was the predictable outcome of a system already built on racialized abandonment, and it tapped into old colonial scripts that have always linked certain people with disease and contagion. Okay, so we've gone through the theory, we've looked at the case studies. What's the bottom line here? Why does this shift in perspective actually matter so much? So let's just break it down. The standard view, it has that colonial amnesia. It forgets the past. The decolonial lens flips the script entirely. It says racism was never a glitch in the system. It was the original operating system. This system works by turning recognized bodies into disposable, extractable flesh to power racial capitalism. And, this is key, this isn't some rare thing that only happens in a crisis. It is a structural, everyday feature of our world. And it's what explains those deep inequalities we see in prisons, in healthcare, and all across the globe. And that really leaves us with one final and pretty uncomfortable question. Because this isn't just about history books, right? This is happening right now. So we have to ask ourselves, whose bodies, right now, are still being treated as disposable, extractable, exhaustible flesh?